Is that the doorbell?
No.
Oh. Yeah, I use the TV just because maybe because I'm on Zoom, you can actually hear them when they ask a question.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, in my computer screen, it doesn't, it's not
Yeah.
best. So we have the microphones now. All right, well, good evening. Welcome to another session of Bottle of the Father. So again, this is a open discussion. If there's any question you ask, and I'll try to answer my best of my ability. If I don't know, I try to find out. So far, I don't think there's only a few I've had to actually look up. So it's been good so far. Keep my toes.
So they've been easy.
I wouldn't say that. But I think it goes to show that the seminary trains us well.
Yeah.
So that's good. That's a good sign, right? So great. So any questions starting off? We started, so you're right on time.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So any initial questions anyone has, feel free. I'll be monitoring Facebook too, see if any questions online. And so tonight, we have the novena. If you want to leave at 7 and come back, I think we probably should still be over here. I'm going to kind of keep it open until like 7:30 or 7:45ish. So if anyone comes after the novena, we can kind of still be here. I also have some treats over on the table over there. We got some bagels and some cookies. So if you want to nosh on something, I know this isn't Friends, Food, and Faith, but I figured for the Christmas season, it might be good to participate Christmas in that way. So. Floor is yours. Anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
Is this the guy you were talking about?
No.
Not the astrophysicist?
No. His name is Father Robert Spitzer.
Spitzer. Okay.
Spitzer.
Okay.
SJ.
Okay. Oh,
So
I should have known.
Yeah. Well, sometimes. No, he's one of the good ones. He's one of the good Jesuits. No, he wrote a great book called In the Beginning, which kind of discusses the scientific data that's been discovered when it comes to the creation of the universe.
Okay.
And kind of, in a way, not necessarily solidifies, but gives a little more credence to the theory of the Big Bang, right? And so the Big Bang was also developed by a Jesuit. Not many people know that, right? And what it basically specifies that there was some point, there was some matter that either collided or imploded or exploded, which caused everything else in the universe to come about. And the theological questions behind that would be, well, then where'd that stuff come from? Regardless of any theory we have scientifically that can be kind of like posit about how things began, where things came from, there's always a metaphysical question. When I say metaphysical, I mean beyond just the natural world, that we have to ask how that happened. And I think Thomas Aquinas always put it best, is that, if you take out the whole, what they call infinite regression, I mean, you keep on going around in circles and circles and circles and circles, that doesn't make much sense rationally. You can only conclude there has to be some kind of immovable mover, as Augustine would say, or even as Aristotle would say, that where everything came from and everything is sourced and to which everything returns back. Philosophically, we would say that is God, right? Or theologically, we would say that was God. And so what he writes about is kind of how our science is really kind of given a lot of credibility to what we believe in our theology, which is good. That's what science is supposed to do. Science is really supposed to tell the hows of things, right? Philosophy really trying to answer the whys of things, right? And theology is really kind of this overarching science that is, and people don't usually think of theology as a science, but that's exactly what it is. It's a science, a study, a knowledge, that's what science means, of God, right? So, I think it's kind of, he has a lot of good writings. I think I don't even finish it, but he was writing a book about out-of-body experiences and like commonality of like the commonality people have experienced in like what they call near-death experiences. I'm not sure if he finished that book or not. I know he was still I think he did all the research for it. But what's very interesting about that subject, there's been a lot of very common experiences with people that have had these situations. And also gives some credibility to what we understand of the afterlife too. So, Father Robert Spitzer.
Robert.
Yeah.
Because I knew it was Robert.
Yes.
So I put in Robert and astrophysicist and creation, and I ended up with this guy.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah.
not him. Okay.
I mean, some of these. I mean, there probably is some good stuff in there. I don't know. I don't really know him per se. I mean, when we talk about, I think what's important when we look at science, we always have to start with the premise that science can neither prove nor disprove the existence of God, right? So even the stuff Father Spitzer puts out, it's not completely conclusive as far as, yep, this definitely says that God exists. Nothing in this earth can really do that, right? Our understanding of God comes from our faith, right? It's an act of belief, not an act of fact, right? And there's a difference between those two. So we always have to start with that premise. That you can find data out there, and this a lot of atheistic scientists, it's just, I don't know if it's necessarily redundant, but a lot of people that are in the scientific field who don't have a belief, have a faith. They point to a lot of data that says, see, well, hey, you have all this happening, and you have antimatter, and blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, but the whole thing is when you point to something that exists that you can actually tangibly see and experience, that obviously is not God. And so you have to go even deeper, right, into that understanding. And like Thomas Aquinas says, if you go to an infinite regression, you keep on deeper, you keep on finding more and more stuff. Well, yeah, you're not going to find God in that aspect, because God is transcendent above all these things. You can't tangibly grasp God because God is not tangible. Jesus had a body. God the Father doesn't have a body. The Holy Spirit doesn't have a body. And so we have to be very cognizant of these things when we enter into these subjects, because what you tend to get is a lot of like the Dawkins and other kind of rationalistic people who say, yeah, God doesn't make sense just because, well, this chair exists, that was made by a human being, therefore God doesn't exist. Okay, well, but some human being had the idea of that, and we would say that that idea had to come from something. It wasn't just plucked out of thin air that you had these snaps happen and all of a sudden this thought happens, right? Biologically, that may be what happened, but that doesn't grasp the whole concept of thought and where those things come from.
We can't even agree on the mask, so.
Right, and so it's we always have to be very cognizant of these things when we enter into these discussions. What we tend to find is even the rationalistic approaches, they do in some implicit way point to the existence of God anyway. So it's like, part of that is trying to find the fallacy in the argument that they're trying to make. There's something, I think who was the one who just came up with a new book, it was atheistic approach, and I think what it was, the whole concept comes down, especially the new atheism, is kind of looking at making yourself a God, right? And that's really what it's all directed to. It's all relativistic. Morality is kind of the way you make it, and if that's the case, then that means you're a God. And so if you're making the point, then okay. I think Dawkins kind of makes the argument that, well, your God is just one more God beyond what I believe. And that's what his concept of God. It's like, well, okay. But I even think that can be answered by this philosopher named Boethius, who was a Christian philosopher. And his conclusion was God is beyond anything that can be thought. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because once you understand something, well, then that's obviously not God. It's got to be beyond that, right? And I think it kind of puts a lot of closure to some of those arguments that are being made.
I had another one of my weird questions. Okay. There's the 10 Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
Although my dad said when you're 65, you get a 10% senior discount. But I don't know about that.
I don't think there's anywhere in any theology about that, but I mean, hey.
I don't know which one he was going to throw out.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's, the church rules and stuff.
Okay.
Okay. Now, it's not, and I've also heard it's not the letter of the law as much as the spirit of the law.
Sure.
Okay, am I okay?
It's always
so
both
far?
and. So it's always both and.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right. Back when I was a youngster, and even now during Lent, you couldn't eat meat
On Fridays. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or you go to hell. Or you be a mortal sin. Okay. Okay. Then it got into is pork and beans. If you eat pork and beans on a Friday,
right,
is that a mortal sin? That 2 centimeter piece of fat that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but now people are spending $20 and going out to Red Lobster.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you got the letter of the law. People
Mhm.
going to Red Lobster.
Mhm.
You know, those are just two examples of.
Yeah, so I would say in both situations you're not necessarily following the spirit or the letter of the law, right? So there's always a middle way when we talk about these things, right?
Mhm.
So if the purpose of, and I think it's always important to point out in these circumstances, Vatican II didn't get rid of that requirement on Fridays in general, right? What Vatican II allowed for was other ways of maintaining the penitential spirit of the day. It also allows that to have meat if you're maintaining that penitential action, right? So what I mean by that is, if you read the documents of Vatican II, it never says that the prohibition of meat on Friday has been removed. What it says is that if another form of penance is done on Fridays, meat can be eaten on that day, right? That doesn't apply to Fridays in Lent because they want to maintain that tradition, right, that's been passed down from generation to generation. Okay, so right, the purpose of that is to understand that Friday is always a recognition of the death of Jesus, and because of the supreme act that Jesus made for us, we in some small way reciprocate our love for him by doing some act of penance, right? In this case, it's eating fish or not eating meat on that day, right? Now, why? Does anyone know the history of that, or the tradition of why was no meat instead of anything else on that day?
So all Catholic parishes can have fish fries?
Make money.
Yeah. But it's a money maker, right? Yeah, maybe. I think it's really what it was back in probably since since really probably early years in the church. Meat was always considered a delicacy, right? The people that had meat were the ones that could afford meat. And who could afford meat? Well, the aristocracy, right? The people that, could, do that kind of thing. But anybody could fish. Anybody could actually catch their own fish, right? And so really the act of giving up that meat on that Friday was a way of bringing everyone into commonality with each other, in a way humbling those who are rich and elevating those who are poor, right? There's a levelness involved with that. Now, it just so happened that also the Vatican owned a lot of ports. So there may be some financial situation going on there, right? But also we trust that whenever money comes in the church, that's always used for some kind of good, right?
They didn't have to eat fish sticks.
That's true. I don't eat fish sticks. I don't know fish sticks. So again, it got matter of taste too, right? I mean, so when it comes down to these things, in that same regard, okay, even though lobster may be fish, is that really coinciding with what the purpose of that day is?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Now, whether it's sinful or not, even back then there was a very objective understanding of sinfulness, right? There's always kind of been that understanding. I think, though, we have to be very cognizant that what the church teaches about sinfulness is that sin is always a subjective thing. There's objective morality, and I want to be very clear about that, right? There's a difference between relativism and objective truth. There are objective things you can say that is wrong, right? If I see someone robbing a bank, I can say that is wrong action. That is morally wrong. But I can't say that person's committing a sin. The only person who can say if that person is actually committing a sin or not is God, of course, and the person doing it. Because as an objective observer, I can say, you're taking something that doesn't belong to you, that's not good. But I don't know if that other person knows that. And I also don't know what the reason that person is actually doing that. The rationale can sometimes reduce the culpability of these things.
Well, that was my point with the church's teaching, that there's wiggle room in there.
Well, we want to be clear. So when we talk about divine law, right, what flows from divine law is ecclesiastical law, right? There's a reason and a purpose for these things we put in place, right?
Okay.
And so even when we talk about the precepts of the church, right, that is a flowing from divine law. That was given, the authority was given to the church to make these decrees from Jesus himself, right? Now, did Jesus ever say, yeah, no, hey, look, no meat on Friday? Well, no. But Jesus also said it was good to sacrifice. And so we're looking at this from, okay, well, we're taking one day out of the week that we're going to offer some sacrifice in recognition of that day of what the sacrifice Jesus made. There's a good in that. And now there's a difference between also willfully breaking that law and accidentally, right? So accidentally, there's no actual willful act, in which case there wouldn't necessarily be a sin, right? Where there's a will, there's a morality in it, right? Where there's an agent actually doing action, that's where the morality comes from. It comes from the willfulness of that person. So we always have to be very cognizant of that. So even if I see someone eating pork and beans, I know they're Catholic on a Friday, I can say, that's not a good idea. But even if they just ate the pork and it's like, I didn't realize, okay, well, all right. Do I have to go confess that? Well, no. Should you eating more of it? Well, probably not. But even then there's a good rationale to make, right? Well, I've already eaten it and plus otherwise it's going to go to waste.
It's going to waste.
Okay. But I'll do some other form of penance maybe that day in order to rectify the situation. Okay, all right. Again, the morality is objective, but the actual sinfulness of it is always subjective.
So you don't get a lot of pork and bean stories in confession.
I couldn't even tell you if I did. But no, I think, that's one thing when it comes to being a confessor is when someone comes to the confessional and starts confessing their sins, I'm assuming they're mortal for that person. Because I don't know any better. I wasn't there when they did it. I was in their minds when they did it. The only person who is mortal or not is the person confessing and God. Right? So, does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Great.
I never thought eating meat on Friday was a mortal sin.
So that's a precept of the church. That Fridays of Lent. Now it does say on Fridays during Lent now, right? It used to be every Friday.
Right.
But yeah, Fridays of Lent is a mortal sin because just of the recognition of that day. And again, it comes down to willfulness. I don't care what's wrong, we eat this bacon. Well, that's okay. Well, do you know that's wrong? Yeah. Now here's the other trick though too, because in order to actually be mortal, there has to be a full understanding and a full willfulness in it.
But you also have to know that it's
and see that's the thing,
serious,
right? Exactly
serious
right.
sin.
And so you see, I'm going to eat this bacon. Well, do you know why that's wrong, or why you shouldn't? Cholesterol. Well, that's not really the theological reason. Yeah, that could be, right? Especially if you have high cholesterol, maybe it's not good to eat that bacon. And could that be sinful? Well, maybe.
But then a lot of your eating is probably sinful.
Exactly right. Yeah. And so it comes down to, well, do you know why the church puts that in place? Do you understand the reasoning? I would imagine a lot of people don't. Because I was never really told when I was growing up why that happened. I was told it was a good sacrifice to make. Okay. Maybe that's enough when you're whatever. Okay. But then you start to understand the history of it and realizing, okay, well, this makes a lot more sense now in context.
Yeah, I was told it was a mortal sin. You go to hell if you eat that, and you go to heaven if you go to Red Lobster.
Yeah. I think in both scenarios you can make arguments for and against.
Well, this was the nuns back then. And
right. And and also too, I think we have to understand too. God bless them. When it comes to anyone, whether it be lay people or nuns or sisters or brothers or priests, right? You teach things at a moment that people kids, especially that age, can understand and receive. And I think part of the misconception we always have, and this is for everybody, regardless of who actually taught them or taught these things, the understanding is you're supposed to mature in this understanding, right? A lot of us, though, once we get out of grade school maybe, or even high school, well, that's it, I know what I need to know about the faith, that's it, I'm done. No. As a matter of fact, we have a whole sacrament that's dedicated to this. The sacrament of confirmation. That's a sacrament of maturity with an understanding that you never stop maturing in the faith, just as we never stop maturing naturally, right? Yeah. And so what we try to instill in the 8th graders especially is, it is foolish to think that you're going to walk out of this school and know everything you need to know about the faith. It's foolish to walk out of the high school that you're going to graduate from and think you're going to know everything you know about the faith. It's foolish to walk out of the college you go to or the seminary you go to and think that you're going to know everything you need to know about the faith. Because here's the, I don't know if it's a secret or not, it's impossible to teach you everything about the faith, even in one lifetime. You can dedicate yourself to a particular saint for an entire lifetime and still not actually get everything you can, knowledge-wise, out of that saint. So, we're always called to grow and learn. And it has to start somewhere, right? So I think that's the idea. The sisters, as holy of women as they were trying to approach a difficult topic in a way that can be understood by 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds.
Yeah, we were like 7.
Yeah.
First grade.
Right.
And adultery is what?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. How do you broach that topic with a 7-year-old, right? And even with the 4th graders, like when we talk about morality in 4th grade, we start with the virtues, and we come to that topic. What I always tell them is, adultery, it has to do with reducing someone to something less than human. That's what adultery is, right? And that takes a lot of different forms. Because some people, what, slavery? Yeah, that's reducing someone to less than human. That could fall under that, sure. The nature of that is a little different than what adultery is trying to get at, but yeah, that's still part of it, right? And it doesn't violating one command doesn't mean you violate others either, right? I mean, so you could violate multiple commandments too. So we'd be very cognizant of that too. So yeah, but I mean that's difficult, and so it's much probably easier, and probably is more impactful, to say, if you eat meat on Friday, that's mortal sin, and you shouldn't do it. And part of that's appeal to authority. And at that age, that's probably the best way to handle it. Yeah. Because once you get out in 12, 14 years old, you're going to have questions. I don't know how many people actually ask the question at that age. I know I didn't really question at that age. But I think the discussion changes when you're that old. Not that you say it's not a mortal sin, you're saying here's why it's a mortal sin. Here's why it's not good to do that. Here's why the church says it's not good to do that. Right. But I think we tend to we hear something that is retained in some way, and then we don't question anymore because why should I? I know the answer to that question. It's mortal sin. I go to hell if I eat meat on Friday. Okay, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough for most people, right?
But then you look at your parents who are eating a steak and they go, oh.
Mm-hmm. Well, even that too. It's funny because I think some people get these confused as well because there's the precepts of the church, and then there's sort of restrictions when it comes to fasting and abstinence. And sometimes people get that confused. Well, I'm over 55. I can eat steak now. No, no. You don't have to fast, right? That's okay. You don't have to fast over 55 because of the health of the person, right? And same thing. We're under 13, sure, but that doesn't mean you cannot abstain from meat. That's a precept of the church. That doesn't change based on your age, right? But it goes to show how confusing it can be. And again, confusion does not condemn someone. I think it's always important to recognize, I tell this people in the confessional sometimes, but especially people who are a little more scrupulous. God does never condemn you on a technicality. God doesn't work that way. Especially on a technicality you had no idea about. Right? So we always be very clear about that. Okay.
So he's not gotcha God.
He's not a gotcha God. He's a merciful God. Right? And again, even when we talk about sacraments by desire, confession can be received by desire. All that's necessary for the grace of the sacrament to work is contrition. That's it. Right? And to be contrite, you have to be knowledgeable of what you've done. There's only one sacrament that cannot be received by, what did I say? Desire. There's only one sacrament that can't be received by desire.
Marriage.
Nope.
Holy orders.
Holy orders. Holy order is the only sacrament that cannot be received by desire.
But marriage can?
Mm-hmm.
You have to start
Now,
looking around.
let's be clear though, right? So usually snares come about like in mortality issues. So let's say you're on an airplane with your fiance and the plane starts going down, right? You can make a vow to each other at that moment, right? And receive the grace of the sacrament, right? Now, if you were to survive the plane crash,
Then you would need.
you probably still need, yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing like confession, right? If we're going on a plane, I'm on the plane with you, I can give everyone a general absolution. But I have to be very clear that, hey, look, this applies for this. If you survive, you got to go to confession. Sorry. That's just how it goes,
Yeah.
right?
I know they do that in time of war.
Time War II, exactly. Yes, right. Good.
So we've been talking about sin. Is there a list of mortal sins and non-mortal sins listed anywhere?
See, okay, so there are objective moral truths. So the Ten Commandments, the Beatitudes, the precepts of the church, right?
Okay.
Those are all morals, right? They'll deal with morality. Sinfulness is always up to the person that does it. So here's the thing. I know because my conscience has been formed correctly, and I just can understand the rationale that if I take someone else's life, we're outside of self-defense,
Right.
but if I go willfully take someone's life, that is wrong. I know that's wrong. And if I do that anyway, that's a sin,
Got it. Okay.
right?
But what level is it?
That'd be mortal for me. Now that's different than, let's say, okay, I'm in charge of demolition of a building, and unbeknownst to me, there was a homeless person that was camping out in the bottom level of that building, right? And I pull the plunger, and boom, that goes up. The person dies. That's definitely not mortal.
I would think it would be a sin.
I never had any intent. Well,
If you didn't know.
here's the question is, could I have gone swept it maybe before I actually pulled the plunger? Could I made some better effort of actually keeping people from getting out of it? Maybe. And so therefore I could say, yeah, you know what, maybe that was venial, but I definitely never had intent. I didn't know, and therefore it wouldn't have been mortal, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's difficult to actually gauge that line because the morality of the action depends on the object of the action, the intention of the action, the circumstance of the action, right? So that's where the morality would come from. But sinfulness would be how much of that I know, and did I still do it anyway if I had that full knowledge of it? I mean, we see that also in legal. There's a difference between premeditated murder and murder in the second and third degree, right? And that's, I think, we say like, well, yeah, one's definitely mortal sin, other one might be venial. Intention is really kind of the key when it comes to those kind of things. So where that line is, I think that's why it's a little bit different for everybody. Because you could also say someone that has not a malformed conscience.
Right.
Well, if they were understood that taking someone's life is not wrong, it's not a sin for them at all. And could you have that's more theoretical in a way, right? So is it possible that someone was raised completely opposite the Judeo-Christian morality, to where everything that was considered good would be bad? Yeah, that's possible. Is it practical? Probably not. But most of them, when we talk about these morality discussions, typically are more in the theoretical realm anyway. So, like the classic example of that is, let's say you have a man who has a family and he lost his job. They go through their entire savings to keep the kids in school and be feeding the kids and keep their house. The man can't get a job. There's some kind of maybe I don't know. Maybe there's like an act of God that kept him in the industry he was getting in. He has to go back to school and get trained, or the circumstances such where this person cannot get any more work, even though they tried everything they could. They've reached out to every organization on demand to try and get help for their children, and they're out of the point where they can't even go to those places anymore. The man goes into a grocery store. He's looking for a job. A loaf of bread falls off the shelf
Into his hand.
into his hand, let's say, and he walks out with that loaf of bread to feed his family. Is it moral?
No.
Well, again, maybe it is. Because the object of that action wasn't necessarily to steal. The object was done for his family. His intention really wasn't to steal from this person. Maybe he thought, well, when I get a job, I'll pay him back. Right? And the circumstantial stuff, well, this is a big chain of stores. Are they really going to be impacted? Is anyone going to lose their job if this loaf of bread actually gets... That's some of the rational process is really kind of important in these situations. Now, theoretically, that's more theoretical. Practically speaking, if a person can't find help in this society today, especially in the first world, there's bigger problems than the guy just actually has an issue. Right? So that's kind of where we have to make those distinctions between practicality and more the theoretical. Right?
See, I would think that if a guy stole a loaf of bread to feed his family,
Mm-hmm.
is infinitely different than a financial guy who duped some old widower
You are absolutely right, Paul.
out of all
You're absolutely
of
right.
his or her
Right.
life savings.
And that's why we always have to say that not only so the object, the intention, and the circumstance has to be good for it to be a good moral act, right? Only one of those has to be bad for it to be immoral. So again, the line has to be, well, where's that line then, right? In the theoretical, you can kind of have this discussion theoretically and say, okay, is there a circumstance where this could happen? Sure, anything is really possible, but how probable is that? And we would definitely say the person that's a multi-million-dollar hedge fund manager that dupes an old woman out of her life savings, yeah, that would definitely be immoral. Now, does that person understand that?
He's probably done it for years.
Maybe. And so that's the other thing too. Like if you get in that habit of doing, now maybe the first time he did it may have been a mortal sin. If he actually had that on his conscience and knew that to be the case. But also too, addiction comes into play sometimes. And we start getting this habit of doing these things. We see that more like alcohol, pornography, smoking, some of these more external things to us. Addiction does reduce your culpability, right? To the point where it wouldn't necessarily be a mortal sin. Now you could say the first time they did it may have been a mortal sin, even the second or third, right? But once the thing of addiction happens, your culpability is greatly reduced. Right? So it's not always a very cut and dry. Here's your black and white. Here's your answer for mortal sin, not mortal sin, because that's always up to the person.
Back in the 50s, it was pretty black and white.
I know.
Yeah.
And what I say is, when we come to talk about morality, I think it really is. We talk about the moral objection, like the moral objective. If you look at the Ten Commandments, it's very clear. Honor your father and mother, keep the Lord's day, don't use the Lord's name, do not kill, steal. Basic stuff that makes sense, right? Now, from that flow other understandings, right? So, yeah, I shouldn't cheat on my wife, but also I shouldn't engage in a marital act by myself or someone I'm not married to, right? I shouldn't not only steal, like, tangible things, but also, like, goofing off at work when I should actually be working. Am I stealing in that respect too, right?
Stealing time for
Yeah,
employees.
exactly. And so, but do most people even think about that? Right, probably not. And fortunately, we've had several classes on morality and ethics, and so you kind of start thinking, you start to realize, like, and there's also an added issue that once you actually get deeper in the moral life and your spiritual life, you become much more aware of your own sinfulness. Some of the greatest saints were daily penitents. Because as they grew more in the spiritual life and the moral life, they realized, oh man, I'm not doing this right. And what you tend to find is really, it's not necessarily sins of commission that you're really being cognizant of, it's sins of omission. Right?
What you should have been doing.
Yeah. So it's a struggle, but it's also a good. I mean, in many ways, ignorance is bliss. But also, it's also horrible because you're not aware of these things.
I should
And that
stop
kinda-
coming here.
And that kind of keeps and it kind of keeps you from a deep relationship with our Lord.
Yeah.
right? And that's
But you know,
kind of
every
the sad
sin you
thing about
have is a double sin. It's a
Mhm.
sin of commission and a sin of
Yep.
omission.
Mhm. It's also, not only that, it also has a double effect. It's an offense against God, and that's also an offense against your neighbor. And I think it's interesting. We talk about we were talking with RCA about the sacraments. We got done with our sacramental talks, and it's so. I mean, it's difficult because you could talk about each individual sacrament for a whole year probably, and still not actually get everything done. And you're trying to condense this all into 1 hour. 2,000 years of Catholic teaching, an hour a day, every hour a week. And we talk about things like confession and about why do we have a penance, because the absolution by the priest reconnects you with God, right? So what's the purpose of the penance? Does anyone know?
Probably just to draw you closer to God.
It does that.
I would think it would be to reflect on what just happened.
It could.
So it strengthens you to
Sure.
do better the next time.
Sure. It also is an act of love towards God too, right? Good. But that's not its primary reason.
It's punishment.
Yeah. Actually kind of is. Because what it is so
I was being facetious.
no, but no, in reality, so here's the thing, right? In reality, so we cannot give God justice. It's impossible for us to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the only way we can receive God in that way is for God to give us mercy. And that's what the absolution is. It's an act of mercy on God's part. But we can give justice to those we've offended, right? So the penance is reconciliation with the community, with the people that were offended by your sin.
That little ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And people may say, well, what about personal sin? Like people, well, yeah, but even that still has an impact on other people. In maybe implicit ways or other ways that wouldn't necessarily be visible, but does have impact on other people. In the way we either interact with them or the way they interact with us. So that's really the purpose of the penance.
Okay.
And so it's like, when I talk to the secretaries about this, I say, okay, well, let's say you go to confession and you get the penance from the priest and you walk out of the confessional after you get the absolution and you say, I'm going to do my penance later. It's cool. I got some stuff to do. You walk out and get hit by a bus. Right? Die. Where do you go? Eventually.
Well, we all
Right.
go to the intermediate.
Yeah, right, yeah. Purgatory, right? You gotta go, because the penance still needs to be done, right? The justice still needs to be given, right? In one way or another, okay? Let's say you walk out of the confessional, you do your penance right away, you walk outside and get hit by a bus. Where are you going?
Heaven.
Straight in. Provided you haven't done any sin between the time you left the church to the time you get hit by the bus, yeah, you're good to go, right? Of course, the other way hopefully doesn't happen, where the priest does not absolve you, but there are circumstances where that could be the case. It just kind of depends, right? Partially, if there's no contrition, the priest cannot absolve you. Right?
How many Catholics do you think know this regarding the? Gosh, we should have the entire church in here listening to all this.
Well, they could be.
Maybe they are.
Well,
We got one person
yeah,
listening so
this
far.
is
I don't
online.
know.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. We tried to talk about this. I tried this with the second graders. Tried talking with RCA. To tell you the truth, I didn't really know these things until I went to the seminary.
Okay.
And I always kind of preface that by saying that I am sure at some point this probably was taught to me at some point. But maybe I wasn't in a place to receive it. I mean, when you're a 7-year-old or 8-year-old or even a 14-year-old, how much you're really paying attention when it comes to religion class?
Yeah.
And part of that for me was more of a spiritual pride. Like my thought was, I go to mass every Sunday, and whatever. Why do I need the religion class? Who cares? It's ECA, fine. I'll do what I got to do. But how much are you really retaining? Not much.
Just enough to pass the test.
Yeah. Right.
And get the grade.
And even then, I mean, probably once I walked out, was done with the test. Like, okay, I don't need that anymore.
Yeah, like algebra.
Right.
Flush
Well,
that.
for some. Depends on which field you go into, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So, Father, when did you realize that you needed or wanted to go into the seminary? I mean, when did all of it come about then?
So, okay. So when I determined to go into the seminary, or when, like, in the context of my whole vocation story, or you want the entire vocation story?
Yeah.
You want the entire vocation story?
Well.
Okay, how much time we got? Okay, great. All right. Well, I think Paul, you think you've heard this story, maybe, yeah. So
It's a great story.
So you can go ahead and take a nap for a few minutes.
It's a great story.
You can have some of the bagels.
That's right. I first heard it when I was 12, and it was Good Friday. There was no service on there's no mass on Good Friday, but I was one of 4 that was chosen to come and help serve the service, and I was the only one that showed up. Now, part of that's because my parents always instilled in me that if I sign up for something, you do it. But my companions, who were supposed to be that day, they were at Six Flags because that was the first day Six Flags opened. Now, regardless of whether I had obligation or not, listen to my parents, there is no way my parents were going to let me go to Six Flags on Good Friday. So I went to the service, and at the time in the rectory, we had 3 priests living there who were all different races, different ages, different backgrounds. And I grew up in a household where I was the oldest of 5, and I had 4 younger sisters. And I think, looking back and reflecting on this, what really appealed to me was the brotherhood and the camaraderie that these 3 men had with each other. That I didn't have. I had my dad, but there was a brotherhood that I never experienced. And I saw that for the first time in this sacristy with these 3 men. And so there's something that was very appealing to me in that. So I went through the next 5 years or so thinking, well, seminary might be a where it could end up. That sounds like a good idea. Until I turned 17.
Girls.
And then, well, partially, actually what it really was, I look at this back, at the time I think it was just like, it was fear. Because, again, being instilled in me that once you sign up for something, you go through with it. If I went to the seminary, that was it. I mean, they could kick me out, I guess, but barring that, I was going to become a priest, and a priest is not just till you die, it's forever. And so imagine, like, getting married at 17. That's kind of where I was. It was like, well, that's not going to work. So I went to the next best thing. I went to Rolla, where they have just as many women there, and it's just as academically challenging. I shouldn't say that, they have more women there, but not too many.
Yeah, my daughter went there.
Yeah, right. And well, at the time when I went there, it was I think it was the girl to guy ratio was 1 to 7.
That's what it was.
Yeah, so it wasn't very big. So I went there. I joined a fraternity again, searching for that brotherhood that I experienced, right? And it was a different type of brotherhood, not the same brotherhood. Very good men. It was good. It was a good experience in the fraternity. I actually had a great time in the college. But I graduated college thinking, well, I guess family life. I'm looking for a wife, and I got a job and started working. And I had some really good relationships. I had some really bad ones, up and down. And I was kind of going through the cycle, and I was actually one of the good ones when I was invited to an Episcopal ordination for my cousin, His Excellency Bishop Edward Rice. And so I went to the first time I've ever been to a discipleship ceremony, and afterwards he pulled me aside and said, I always thought you were going to become a priest. And I said, well, that ship has sailed, right? I'm 30 years old at this point. I had a girlfriend who was actually going really well. I thought this might be it. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if that's going to work. And I should also mention, I was just made a lead engineer down at Boeing in Charleston. So things are going very well for me. And he said, well, okay, regardless, I have this retreat next month. I just need to fill a spot. Because at the time he was the vocation director for the Archdiocese. And so he was trying to fill a bed for this retreat. I said, you know what, I'll help you out. I'll come there. Because I'll come in for the weekend, it'd be nice, maybe take some time off and come home. And yeah, I'll do this. But I had no thought that this was going to be what I'm going to do. So I go to that retreat, and at some point in the retreat, they told us, like, in order to actually become a priest, you have to actually ask for an application. And the thought being that, you have to have the courage enough to actually do that. And I got through the weekend, and I never asked for one. I actually met with Bishop Rice. We had meetings, and was like, yeah, I don't think we're going to ask for it. He's like, oh, I kind of figured, but thanks for coming. But I walked away from the experience with an understanding that, I do need to get a little bit deeper in my faith. I never really turned away from Catholicism. I wasn't one of those guys who went off to college and never went to Mass. I actually went to Mass every Sunday. A few times I was working, and maybe I would skip mass here and there based on whatever, but I never was unfaithful, I guess, to the point. I would compartmentalize my faith. Like, my faith was just on Sunday, and the rest of the week I had to deal with it, right? I would never invite Jesus in these moments, right? I would pray sometimes, like, hey, Lord, help me with this, whatever. More like the genie Jesus rather than like, Jesus like loves me and really wants the best things for me. But I did recognize in that retreat that I need to get a little bit deeper with my faith. And so what I did is I walked away from that weekend. I got a spiritual director, and I started going to regular confession, like once a month. And it was funny, I talked to the spiritual director, who was actually the vocation director for Charleston, South Carolina. And so I contacted him out of the blue, kind of, and I was just like, hey, I'm looking for spiritual direction. Do you think you can help me out? And he said, why don't we meet and we'll talk about it. I'm like, okay. So I go into his office and after work one day, and he's just like, so why? I was like, well, I went to this retreat last month or last few weeks ago, and I just want to get deeper involved in my faith and kind of grow deeper in my spirituality and my moral life. He's like, oh, okay. And he's like, so this was what kind of retreat? I'm like, well, it was a priest retreat, but I don't really think I'm going to be, pursuing that vocation. He's like, okay, well, if you were to, let's say, become a priest, would you stay here, or where would you go? I'm like, well, actually, they gave us this book called To Save 1,000 Souls, and I was reading the book, and in the book it said that you're supposed to go to where you consider home for your vocation. And so I said, well, I read this book, and I think I'll probably go back to St. Louis. I mean, I got good people here and friends, but home for me is St. Louis. So like, oh, okay. And so I think it was trying to maybe angle a little bit, but part of it was recognized too that if I were discerning a vocation, he could not be my spiritual director. He's the vocation director for that diocese. But since I wasn't, he was like, okay, fine, I'll take you out. Great. So we were meeting for, I think it was my spiritual director for about 2 years. So the following year, I come back. I figure, let's go on the retreat again. That was fun. I go home again, a little vacation time. And over the course of that retreat, something hit me. What they do is they do 40 hours exposition during the retreat. So the Blessed Sacrament was exposed the entire weekend. Yeah. And we had a lot of time in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And something just like pained me. It's like, why don't you just ask for an application? What's the worst that could happen? You just ask for it. If you fill it out, great. If you don't fill it out, who cares? Okay. So I went to the vocation director at that point, who was now Father Chris Martin. And I said, yeah, I think we want to take an application, if that's okay. He's like, yeah. So he gives me an application, and I start looking at it, like, okay. And so I go I go back to Charleston. The next I pick up a breviary, which is, the prayers of, and I start going to the daily mass. So this is right in the midst of Lent. And so I was trying to figure out a good way to go to mass every day, which wouldn't really impact my work schedule, and I could do it. Charleston's not like St. Louis. It's not like they have mass going every moment of the day, and the parish are a little more spread out. So I was able to do stuff for Fridays. Friday's the only day of the week I couldn't go to mass outside of my times of working. And so I talked to my boss, who was also Catholic. I said, hey, for Lent, I'm trying to do this practice of going to mass every day, and the only day I can't make it work is Friday. Is that okay if I maybe take an hour in the morning between like 8 and 9 or 9:30? And I'll make it up for whatever. And she's like, oh yeah, okay, it's fine, whatever. So I started doing that. Started praying the breviary every day. I also talked to my spiritual director about direct confession. So there was something that kind of pinging on me. And for a good 3 months there, I was just like, I don't know, maybe this is what I'm getting called to do. I don't know. In the meantime, the girlfriend and I broke up. Okay. So that was kind of, that was more a long distance thing. She was living in Kirksville. I was living in Charleston. And it was just kind of rough. And so amicably broke up. She now is married. I think she has like 3 kids now. She found her vocation. I found mine. But I started doing this, and then I remember it was Good Shepherd Sunday in Easter, and I was kneeling down before Mass, and I was just like, Lord, I don't know what you want from me. You don't have to knock me off my horse like Paul, but just give me some kind of direction here. Give me a sign. What do you want? And the gospel that day was from John 21, verse 15 through 17. And because we're Catholics, we don't know the Bible. I'll tell us what that is. So this is after the resurrection. The apostles go back to fishing because that's what they know. and they're fishing, and all of a sudden they see on the shore Jesus with this charcoal fire. John turns to Peter and says, "It's our Lord." And so he jumps into the Sea of Galilee, swims to the shore, and for a few moments there, while the other apostles are coming in, Jesus is walking with Peter, and he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And Peter responds, "Well, yeah, Lord, you know I love you." And then again, "Well, do you love me?" "Yeah, you know I love you. Feed my sheep, tend my sheep, feed my lambs." And at that moment, I felt Lord wasn't saying, "Peter, do you love me?" It was, "Mark, do you love me?" And I was like, "Yeah, well, feed my sheep, tend my sheep, feed my lambs." So from that moment, I started filling out the application. I started arranging the different psychological evaluations and physical evaluations, and all that had to be done back in St. Louis. I had to be flying back and forth and doing all this stuff. I was like, okay, and I had to write up a 10-page essay and blah blah blah. And I was starting to do that, but then I contacted Father Martin. I said, I think I might have a calling here, and it was a realization at that moment that even though if I go to the priesthood or not, become a priest or not, I at least have to go find out if this is where I need to be. And if I go, my rationale was such like this, and the guide, I think, guided by the Holy Spirit in a lot of ways, was if I go and I find out this isn't for me, then at least I know that. And I can at least probably come back to where I need to be, or go somewhere else, or I'll have enough skills anyway to maybe get back on track.
That you can support yourself.
Exactly right. Either way, I'll be in a good position. It was a win-win in reality.
Yeah.
And then if I go and I find out God is calling me this, then great. So if I go and I find out I'm not supposed to be there, well, praise God. And if I go and I find out I'm supposed to be there, well, praise God. So either way, it's a win-win. And so I at least figured I have to go find out. So I contacted Father Martin. He said, "Well, you know what? We can't get you in for this year, but we can probably get you in for next year. But in the meantime, while you're doing all this stuff for your application, why don't you go back to St. Louis and we have a place you can stay. We call it the Colby House.
Oh.
So you can kind of live in community. You can use living with other guys and something, because it's been a while for me. I've lived alone for so long. I was like, okay, great, sounds good. So it's like, yeah, why don't we have you come back in December, January timeframe, and you can move in and you live here until you come to the seminary the following fall. All right. So I go with my boss. This is September, and I'm like, hey, let me go to. So I was I extended this whole going daily mass or everything.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, let me go to daily mass in Lent and all through the year and stuff. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, I was kind of discerning the priesthood during that time, and I think I'm being called to at least go to the seminary at this point. And there was there was a stunned silence, and she was like, oh, okay, well, I mean, she was Catholic too. She's like, oh, okay, well, good. Can we but what if we make you a level 4? Will you? I mean, or if you pay any more, would that make any? I'm like, no. She's like, well, so what's funny though, before I left, she made me a level 4, and it's I guess I'm thinking if we came back, at least get back. I'm like, okay. She was very sweet, but it was also kind of one of those things yeah, this you gotta whatever. And so I got in the seminary. I lived in the Colby House which is actually over the old Mary and Joe rectory. So I was over there on Minnesota for about 9 months. Moved to the seminary the following spring.
So what did you do while you were living?
Yeah, so I was. So the nice thing about that place was, it's free rent, right? It's really more designed for guys who maybe have some debt to pay off. And fortunately, I had no debt, so I was living there basically rent free. Food was provided for, and I would volunteer at the vocation office. For about 6 to 8 hours a day, whatever. Just do whatever they need me to do. Which was great because I got to meet some of the seminarians, I got to meet some of the faculty and staff, and kind of ingrained a little bit early, which was awesome. So I moved to the seminary that following fall, as 2013. Was in pre-theology. And it was funny because up in theology we started studying different languages. I studied Greek. And the Greek passage in John 21, if you read that original Greek, what you realize is there's 2 types of love that Jesus is talking about there. When Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? What he says is, Petros agape su. Do you love me? Will you sacrifice yourself for me? And Peter's response to him is not agapo, it's philo. Philote, Lord, Philotu. And that's more like familial love. It's like, love of a brothers or like friend or sons, that kind of thing. And then Jesus again, well, agape, Peter. And then his response again is, Philo, Lord. And then finally Jesus condescends to Peter and says, all right, Peter, philesu. And then Peter's like, yeah, phile, I got you, I philo, all good. But then what happens afterward, Jesus tells him, like, yeah, you're going to give me the agape. You're going to get there. You're not there yet. And it's kind of a good lesson about ministry, like meeting people where they are and then trying to get them where they need to be. And so Jesus in that passage kind of solidifies that. And things are, there's up and down. Seminary is kind of interesting places. Like, it's a college, it's also kind of a fraternity house in a way too. And there's a lot of up and downs. For the most part, my seminary experience was very good. I learned a lot. It was really great. I think part of the advantage of going there as a mature man is that I wasn't really caring about the grades. Like, college guys are more like, I want to get the A, I want to get whatever. I just want to make sure I learned something, right? And so I found that if I did that, the grade would come anyway. And so I think that was a great advantage for me. And then I was ordained a deacon, and what was really fascinating about that is, and it's unfortunate the guys the last few years haven't been able to go, but we usually have a retreat in the Holy Land, right. Around the beginning of the year. And so we were able to go, which was awesome, and it was an amazing experience.
What year was that?
That was 2018. No, 2019, January 2019, right? No, was I ordained priest? 2019, yeah. January 2019, that's right, yeah, okay. Yeah, got me all mixed up, I'm like, 2019, that was it. So it was before the whole craziness with right year before. And so part of that, though, is you get to preach in the different places, different sites, right? So the deacons had an opportunity to actually preach and proclaim the gospel and preach at these different sites. And one of the spots was Peter's primacy, right? Where the actual, there it is, beautiful. Was actually this is where Jesus had this conversation with Peter, right? There's a big church there, it dates back to the 3rd century. It's actually pretty amazing. And they have these.
Is your second name Peter by any chance?
No, it's actually Raymond.
No,
yeah.
I thought that was just.
But it was kind of cool. It was like, so one of those opportunities. But me being the elder statesman, I'm like, I'll let one of my younger brothers take that.
Flip
whatever.
a couple of those.
And so, lo and behold, it goes through everybody, and nobody picks that spot to preach. And so I was like, all right. And so I signed up, and I was able to preach at that spot. It was amazing. So that's also why that passage is on my ordination card for my ordained priest.
Awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's kind of amazing how the Lord works. So, yeah. But also wonderful. Right?
So it took you 6 years.
Seminary took me 6 years, and I discerned for about 2 to 3 before I entered. So, yeah, now it's actually 7, because they actually add a pastoral year for guys now.
So guys coming out of high school have how many years? Just plus 4?
No, so it'll be 9. So here's the way it works is, so a guy coming out of high school, they need a college degree.
Correct.
Right? And typically their college degrees, it's 4 years in philosophy. That's what they get a college degree in. Guys coming out of, unless you already have a philosophy degree, guys coming from other industries, like I had a mechanical engineering degree. So I had to go get my philosophy credits though.
Oh.
So for 2 years I had to study philosophy with the collegians, and so I actually ended up with a philosophy degree. But you don't necessarily have to have a philosophy degree, just the credits to do it, right?
But if you went to the University of whatever and got a degree in philosophy and then went to the seminary, you would.
It depends on which university or whatever.
Of course.
So
Thank goodness
if
for
you,
that.
so for instance,
Pick a good one.
one of my brother priests he had a philosophy degree from Webster, and he started to take credits because the philosophy he was getting over at Webster wasn't necessarily the same they were going to teach you at the seminary, right? So part of that they may look at and say, well, you have this, you need this, you have this, you need this. But he did 1 less year, which was fine, but you still had to take some.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just kind of depends. But there's some guys but either way, it's not necessarily about the intellectual, it's about the other formation too.
Oh, sure.
So spiritual formation, human formation, and pastoral formation. So regardless, it's probably at least 5 years if you already have a philosophy degree.
Wasn't it years ago that they came out of the 8th grade and went to the prep
Well, they had the high
or
school
something?
seminary, and that the high school I think closed in '93 or '94. Prep South did, I think that was last time. And there's advantage and disadvantage. I think a lot of the men that came through those programs were very good, but you had a lot of guys who came through and they ended up leaving. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's something to be said about living some kind of more secular life that gives some like kind of influence. So people are making an argument about the college. I'm not really sure. I think if I've often thought about this too. If I went as a college student to the seminary, would that have been good for me? Would I have even made it? I don't know if I would have made it through, but I think I would have gotten a lot better formation than I did at Rolla when it comes to more of the spiritual, human aspects.
Oh,
Intellectually, I appreciate Rolla. I mean, it was great. Oh my! I mean, shoot, yeah. But I don't think I've been. I don't think I would have as many temptations or maybe kind of gone different routes as I did if I went to Rolla compared to the seminary. But in the same breath, it could be like, well, but also, would I have been able to get through the rigorousness of the college program? I don't know. I don't know.
well, don't you have to, when you're talking to people and, giving advice to people, don't you have to have some secular background?
Well, I think that's true, but then again, I mean, so I look at it this way. I think it's a both and, because right now you're seeing about half the guys are coming out of seminary, they're being ordained. About half are going through the pre-theology program, the other half are going through the college program. So my class, let's say, for instance, we had 7 men. 3 of us came from pre-theology, I mean, we had either careers or other college degrees, and 4 came through the college. All of them were good men. All of them were very down-to-earth, relatable people, right? Yeah, experientially, sure, maybe a little different. But I think part of that, though, is you bring that along. That could kind of come as a priest, I think, right? Because when you really think about it, when you get in the priesthood, the experiences are all going to be different for everybody anyway, right? So I don't know. But I definitely admire the men that come to the college program, because I just know I was not there when I was their age. But also, there's a beauty in the fact that I wouldn't be the priest I am either without actually going through the experiences I went through too.
Yeah.
So I think it is a both and, right? High school, I think there's a reason why they closed the high school program. I can understand, like, maybe, yeah, that might be a little bit too much.
Or mommy wanted me to be a priest.
That could be. But then again, also too, I think one of the advantages now of the seminary program is they're very cognizant of these things, and unless you're there for the right reasons, you're not going to stay very long, right? I think we learn from our mistakes. I think also too to recognize seminary formation has not been standardized. Has not been standardized since 1997 was the first year it became standardized.
Ooh.
I know, and it's kind of interesting to think about that over 2,000 years. And the seminaries are kind of established back in the monastic, even before the monastic days, like in the 4th, 5th centuries. But there hasn't been this commonality in the way they approach seminary formation until 1997. So, yeah, I don't know, right? So yeah, I think kind of it's a both and scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
I had a question.
Sure, Mary.
I read something, and if you can explain to me, what is an oratory? I know there's an oratory like St. Gregory, or what makes an oratory an oratory?
Wonderful. I don't know off the top of my head, but I know this is in canon law. So primarily an oratory is the same as a church, but it's for a particular purpose.
Oh.
So for instance, I think the oratory you're talking about here is the Oratory of Augustine. What is it known? Is it Augustine and James? Right? Yeah. That's where the extraordinary form of the Mass is celebrated. It's actually at St. Luke's, right? Parish. But there's an oratory there called the Oratory of Augustine and James, where the extraordinary form of the Mass is celebrated.
What do you mean extraordinary?
The traditional Latin Mass.
Okay.
Right. So if you went down Francis Sales.
Right.
So Monsignor Morris is the rector of the Oratory of St. Augustine and James. Same with,
Okay.
yeah, the former associate here, right? And so that's different though than like a parish church, which is also different than like a chapel, right? A chapel is really kind of more of a private church where it's not actually open to the public. And let me see if I can find it in here. Directory of churches, chaplains. There's actually, they make a distinction in canon law between these things. Here it is. Let's see what's under this one. That's it, Chancellor, Pastoral Council, Chapter Canons, Pastoral Council, Parish Pastors, Purple Vicars. Okay, 556 to 572. Let's see if I can pull this up.
I had a question on that Latin Mass too.
Well, yeah, so, where does it make a distinction here? Securely support something, let me see if it's back in the, here we go. Ordinary orders office, oratory.
Let's find it on Google.
I don't remember where I read about it.
Yeah, it's on in here. I know it's in here somewhere. I might have to go look on that and get back to you on that one. Okay. I have to find the proper canon, but it does make distinctions between those three things, like a church, a chapel, and an oratory. But typically, an oratory is like it's within a church that's designated for a particular purpose,
Okay.
right? Sometimes used like it would be like an aspect of a church or maybe the basement, but it's usually direct. Like here, that's what it's used for. You have the oratory where the extraordinary form of the Mass is celebrated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me look at that. I'll get the definitions though for the next time. I'll put it on there. Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Before Pope, which Pope did it? The German Pope,
Benedict 16.
Benedict.
Yes.
Didn't he loosen the Latin Mass a little bit? And now I just read in the Sunday paper
Yeah.
that Pope Francis is going, no, we need to tighten that up again.
Yeah.
So now you got Pope versus Pope.
Well,
and it's
no. Okay, hold on.
All right,
Wait a second.
yeah, I'll go to
So here,
confession
hold on.
on that
There's
one.
only one Pope.
I know.
And they're
Okay,
both
yes.
living, so
Yeah,
they're
both
duking
living.
it out.
Okay.
But
So what's the problem with the Latin Mass? Because it's, I think, beautiful.
I agree. Boy, there's a lot of debate within the church about these things. I think when Benedict XVI put it out there, what he was trying to do was trying to reconcile with what is known as the SSPX, the Society of St. Pius X. So Society of St. Pius X are what they call sede vacantis, right? They mean the seat is empty. They believe there hasn't been a legitimate pope elected since Pius X, which was in 1903, right? Obviously, that's not the case. People believe that, part of their rationale for this was the reforms that were done under Vatican II with the Novus Ordo. So, to be clear, the Novus Ordo never did away with the extraordinary form of the Mass. Okay. The championed or elevated, not necessarily elevated is a bad word. It did reform the liturgy into what we call the Novus Ordo today, right? So since Vatican II, there's been two forms of the Latin Rite. There's been the Novus Ordo, all that means there is new way, right? Novus Ordo. And then the extraordinary form, also known as the Tridentine Mass, the Mass from Trent, the Council of Trent. So from the Council of Trent all the way to Vatican II, that Mass was being done in every Latin Rite church throughout the entire world. Okay. What Benedict did is he put a motu proprio out back in, was it 2009, 8, 7, whatever. It was like in 2005, so shortly after that. And basically was saying that, yeah, we look at these two forms as equal in dignity, right? But faithful Catholics, as a matter of preference, can go to either one, provided they recognize that one is not necessarily better than the other. Jesus is showing up in both these masses. The liturgy is still being performed in the proper way. There's still dignity that's retained, right? But maybe you like to have the Mass in the more the extraordinary form. Great, go to that. Maybe you prefer the Mass in the Novus Ordo. Fine, go to that, right? And to my knowledge, that was working fine. I don't know. At least here in St. Louis, I think it was not necessarily a bad thing. What started happening, I guess, maybe not necessarily here, but maybe other parts of the world, was there started to be this division being caused between those who would regularly attend the Novus Ordo, or the extraordinary for the Mass, and most people that were going to the Novus Ordo. The small majority of people that would attend the extraordinary form were kind of like going against that motu proprio, saying this is really the better way. This is really how all Mass should be celebrated, which is a matter of opinion. Okay, you can say that. I mean, people could probably say the same thing about the Novus Ordo, but in reality, are you recognizing the dignity of it and that Jesus is still valid forms of the Mass? To my knowledge, I think that was still being done. I don't know. I really don't know. I think the internet kind of gets involved with a lot of these things, and people put stuff online very vicious or venomous, and that causes a lot of issues. But I think for the most part, if you talk to people on the street that either attend the Novus Ordo or attend the extraordinary form, probably a lot of them don't really coincide with each other anyway. But also, none of them would say like, yeah, okay, great, if they want to do that, probably say if they want to do that, fine. Who cares, right? Big deal. Well, apparently the Holy Father had a different idea. He thought this was causing a great deal of division. And so this past summer, he put out another motu proprio, not necessarily negating the motu proprio from Benedict XVI, but restricting the use of the extraordinary form of the Mass in a lot of dioceses. And basically the justification he was making, which makes sense, the rationale was, never before in the history of the Church should there have been two forms of the Mass. That typically whenever there was a form done that was promulgated by Rome, that would be the form. Same with the Trinity Mass. When the Trinity Mass came out, there was no longer like, oh, you don't celebrate the form of the Gregorian Mass, right, or anything else like that. So there's an understanding there. Okay, it makes sense. Part of the things that the Holy Father was citing was abuses in the extraordinary form of the Mass. Primarily pointing these things about, okay, well, some people maybe are mixing the rite, which is not allowed. Benedict XVI didn't allow that. But also there was this understanding that maybe the extraordinary form was better than the Novus Ordo, and it relevated the dignity of the extraordinary form over that of the Novus Ordo. I don't know, right? But because of that, the Holy Father said that bishops in the diocese should not grant the faculty to ordain men to celebrate the extraordinary form. So in other words, when I was ordained in 2019, I had the faculty to celebrate the extraordinary form of the Mass. Didn't maybe have the knowledge, I had to go get training for that, but others could do it, provided I could do it well. Now I don't. That faculty has been taken away from me, and can only be granted by Archbishop Rosansky formally. Now, there was a recent dubia. That's what you're referring to. A dubia is kind of a question that's being posed. And so a lot of the bishops in the world and other priests were really, was like, can we get some clarification here, right? Because really what the Holy Father ended the motu proprio was with, I leave to my brother bishops when I make these determinations, right? So it's up to you to make sure that this is done properly. And also, even said in the motu proprio, where it's being kind of done, right, it can still be done. Right, but we don't want to set up any new personal parishes and new oratories to start doing this in other places. Okay, all right. So there were some questions that were raised, what they call a dubia. One of those questions was, okay, what does that mean? Let's say we have a parish that celebrates regularly the extraordinary form of the Mass and the Novus Ordo. Well, how does that work, right? Well, what the Congregation for the Divine Worship came back with the Pope's blessing was that, a priest cannot, what they call binate. So binate means you celebrate, which means you celebrate more than one Mass a day, right? Without giving proper permission, right? So basically what he was saying was, well, if you have an extraordinary form of Mass and a Novus Ordo going, you have to get either another priest in there that can actually celebrate the extraordinary form, or you don't do the extraordinary form, right? And so there's other questions about, well, okay, let's say you have a priest that has the faculty to celebrate the extraordinary form, but for whatever reason they can't. But someone who knows how to do it, they actually have to have the same faculty. And they said, well, yes, they do. Right? So it's a little bit restricting, right? I think the purpose is that we unify under the one form of the Mass. You could legitimately ask the question, like, why was it maybe necessary to even do this now? Why did the Holy Father think this was really a thing that was causing great strife in the church? I don't know. The only one who knows that is the Holy Father, right? But I think what that causes confusion sometimes, though, is, well, I can now celebrate the Novus Ordo in Latin, and probably no one will know the difference, right? So the Novus Ordo, the purpose, if you read Vatican II, and there's a lot of this reference back to Vatican documents, Sacrament of Maturity being one of them, was that the purpose of the Novus Ordo, in the use of vernacular, was to have people understand what was happening in the Novus Ordo. But the intention was to go back to the original Latin. And if you, my missal I have upstairs actually has the Mass in Latin and English for the Novus Ordo. And so if I were to go out, now that means that tomorrow, or even this Sunday, let's say, that's a Christmas.
Oh, yes.
I could go out and celebrate the Novus Ordo in Latin, and people would probably have a cow, because they think I'd be celebrating the extraordinary form, which is, you can't do that. You're right, I can't celebrate the extraordinary form in Latin. I can't celebrate the Novus Ordo in Latin. I have every right to do that. Every faculty do that as an ordained priest.
Could you do it in Spanish?
No, my Spanish isn't as good.
Okay. No, but I mean.
Yeah, if I were, I mean, so the authority to do it is granted me no matter what.
Okay. So
Now, the actual
Spanish.
capability of doing it is a little bit different, right? Yeah.
Okay, because
Right.
in Florida we had like a Vietnamese priest.
Sure.
And there was a Mass
Sure.
for all the Vietnamese,
Mhm.
and he did it in
Yeah.
Vietnamese.
Yeah, we had Father Joseph. Father Joseph was here, right? He could have celebrated Mass in Vietnamese if he wanted to. Actually, he's done it a few times in private Masses. Nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
Now, part of that is pastorally speaking, though, is a level of like an understanding of this of yourself to say that even though I probably can do this, should I? Because part of the Mass is a public celebration, right? Regardless, whether it's just me doing it or other people. So active participation is something that should be done. But also then, there's also a misunderstanding of what active participation means in the context of Vatican II. The reason that the Novus Ordo came out was to foster active participation. But that's not a ministry in the Mass. That's not, I should sing the songs along with me. It's not, I should say the words of the Mass along with everybody else. That's not active participation. Active participation as defined by Sacrosanctum Concilium in the documents of Vatican II is an internal disposition for what's happening in the Mass. So in other words, I am providing a spiritual sacrifice in the Mass through my common priesthood. I am engaged fully in the Mass, paying attention to what's happening, understanding what's going on, and being able to give myself in that moment to God, right? You can do that in extraordinary form too. You don't have to actually know the language in order to actually do that, right? So I think Benedict XVI put these out there because the whole intention was active participation. And so as long as you're doing that, whether it be the extraordinary form of the Novus Ordo, great, good. That's the whole point. From what the Holy Father looks like the intention he has is, that's not happening as much in the TLM. I don't know if that's true or not. And the proof he's given is, well, there's been a lot of vitriol and venom coming from people that go to that Mass towards the Novus Ordo, which is not very conducive with that unity. You can even say, well, the Holy Father, the whole point of this, putting this out there was talking about abuses. Well, what about the abuses in the Novus Ordo? Because you can make the argument that there's more abuse in the Novus Ordo than there probably is in the extraordinary form of Mass, in a lot of ways. But he never really approached that topic. Maybe there's more to come. Maybe there's another dubia. I don't know. Stay tuned. Right.
Well, as people get older, us baby boomers, we knew the old Mass.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting because, like, when I started introducing the closing rites in Latin, I got a lot of positive feedback. Mm-hmm. And it was mostly coming from older generations and younger generations. Mm-hmm. But there was this kind of middle generation that wasn't so keen on it. Good people, but it caused some consternation. More so than I thought it was going to be, really, a lot more than I thought it was going to be, right?
Well, the nuns taught us that it was in Latin because then it's the same the world over, no matter where you go, And when I was in Europe, we went to Austria, mm-hmm. Germany. I couldn't understand the sermons,
right?
But I could understand the Mass.
That's been the purpose since since the 3rd century. The Mass has always been in Latin, or 2nd century. I'm sorry, 4th century. So the Mass has always been Latin since the 4th century, for that particular reason. Mm-hmm. Because we understand the Church to be universal, which is what Catholic means. No matter where you go, you should know what's going on. And the language of the Church is Latin.
But I remember thinking at the time when she said that then nobody knows what he's saying.
If you don't learn Latin, yeah.
Yeah.
And see, I think that's part of the discussion, right? Because a lot of people may say, well, then why have we gone back to Latin? We don't know Latin. Okay. So just because you don't know doesn't mean we shouldn't go back, but maybe we should teach you.
I have a missal at home from when I was a kid.
Yeah,
right.
Got the Latin
in English.
Right.
Yeah. And I took 2 years of Latin.
Yeah.
And I'm in the medical field. I'm really glad I got all that Latin.
Well, right? Right. But also, too, I think what a lot of people don't realize, though, is just like you learn any language, you're going to pick it up eventually. It may be difficult at first, but if I were to, especially when you already know the structure of the Mass, which everyone does.
Sure.
If I were to say Dominus Vobiscum, that means the Lord be with you. Et cum spiritu tuo.
Yeah.
And with your spirit, right? You at least know, at least that's what it would be in English. Mm-hmm. The formation of the words would be a little, okay, well, I'll deal with that, but you at least know what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the Sanctus and
right.
Agnus Dei.
Right. So, I think we've done a great disservice, in a way, of not only taking out the vernacular in Latin, but also we've allowed the spirit of Vatican II to actually ingrain itself and not actually what Spirit of Vatican II actually said. And so, is this a product of that? I don't know. Maybe. I think the other thing to recognize too is we pray for the Holy Father. We hope for the best for him. Love him. But also too, he's not going to be the Pope forever. Yeah. And I'm of the mindset, and I've seen this not only in my younger brother priest, but also in generation what I see this desire from men being ordained is I think you're going to see a rejuvenation of that eventually. Mm-hmm. Maybe not a decade from now or 20 years from now, but I think we're going to slowly and surely see that more Latin being introduced in the Novus Ordo. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be more rejuvenation of using Latin in a lot of the I may be crazy. People might call me crazy and say you're nuts, Father. Maybe. I'm just saying. I wouldn't be surprised if it did. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Okay.
Are you sticking around here or are you going out of town?
We're staying here.
Oh, good. Great. Okay, good. All right.
We're staying here.
Okay. All right.
So.
Well, we'll see you on Friday or Saturday. All right. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
So speaking of masses, how many masses can a priest say in one day?
Legally? So legally 2. So just like you guys, right? You receive the Eucharist twice in a day, right?
Correct.
We're under that same canonical requirement. But you're also allowed to receive the Eucharist in any Mass you minister at. So let's say you go to a Mass in the morning and you go to Mass at noon, And then that evening, let's say you have, you go, just because you like going to Mass, you go to Mass in the evening, and you're asked to minister at that Mass, be a lector, an usher, a server, whatever, cantor. You can receive the Eucharist at that Mass, because you're ministering at that Mass, even though you received already twice that day, right? Part of that is kind of, is meant to actually not abuse the sacrament, right? So, what do I mean by that? Well, you could make there, well, why would I not want to receive Jesus all moments of the day, right? I want to receive that, get grace. Yeah. But also, you have obligations throughout the day, right? And so if that's taking away from certain obligations, that would be considered an abuse of the sacrament. So what's a good number then? Well, 2 was decided as a good number because maybe you go at the beginning of the day, the end of the day, but also you don't necessarily neglect your responsibilities at home, with your family, or, you know. So does that also apply to religious? Yes, and part of that understanding is the sacrificial nature of that. That, okay, even though I may desire to receive Jesus 14 times a day, or how many hours are in a day, I can offer that back to him as a gift, right? Now, what this says, though, is for pastoral reasons, you can receive more than once. You can actually not binate, but more than binate, trinate or quadrate or whatever it may be, depending on what actually the circumstances of the particular parish. So, what that would mean is, let's say I have a parish where I'm the only pastor. We have maybe 2 masses in the morning for English-speaking people, but I have a big congregation of Spanish, right? So, okay, well, my 2 masses in the morning are filled, so I can't necessarily reduce that down to 1, and my Spanish Mass is pretty full. Okay, well, there's no way I can get around 3. I have to have 3. And so the law allows for that, right?
Well, I know growing up, you know, we had one priest, and Sundays was 8, 9, 30, and 11. He did them all.
Yep.
Every week.
Yep. And the law allows for that too. Yeah.
And the missionaries that travel around to different.
Well, that's another reason too, right? So you may have, maybe a missionary has like maybe 4 or 5 different territories, and maybe they may go to 4 or 5 different churches that day, celebrate Mass. Well, okay, you got it.
Yeah.
So all right, you know. And part of that's also too, like, you know, the bishop. So part of that also would be what we call in canon law mos, M-O-S. Mos translates into custom. So what it would say, what Moss says is, if the bishop knows about it, and it's been practiced in a particular place or region or church for more than 35 years, it then becomes canon law, particular canon law for that church, right? Now, that can open things up to abuses in some ways, but also depends on like what every archbishop has to know about it up until that 35 years, right? So, that may fall under like the more Moss thing, right? So it's understood this particular missionary in this region, because he would always have to, quadrinate or whatever it may be, right? Okay, fine. That becomes particular canon law for that church. It's been 35 years, and the bishop knows about it. Every bishop that's been there knows about it.
And not only does the bishop know about it, but the priest is actually doing it.
Yes, exactly, right.
So there may be a priest that comes in after 22 years and says, I gotta bring it back to 3. I just can't do 4.
Right, and then we start over again.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So okay.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Where it comes in play, like after 35 years though, like a bishop can't just say you can't do that anymore, because at that point you have to go through a whole process. Not that he can't. He has to probably take it to Rome at that point, because hey, this is canon law. So the only person who could contradict canon law would be the Holy Father, the big guy, right?
And he's busy.
Yeah. Well, they actually have what they call the Rota. So the Rota is the tribunal of Rome, and so typically things don't usually get that far, right? But on some occasions they did. Like Archbishop Carlson, he had experiences with this. That he had a priest when he was, I think he was the bishop of was it Minneapolis or maybe in Sioux Falls, I don't know. But he was he had a young priest just out of the seminary, not too far, but still pretty fresh, and he made him the pastor of this really thriving parish. And so by making him pastor, he gives him all the canonical rights to being a pastor, right? Well, shortly after this man was made the pastor, the parish started declining, right? Started getting some problems. And so Archbishop Carlson went to this pastor and said, I'm going to have to move you. Well, the pastor said, well, you can't. Well, what do you mean? Well, canon law, not this canon law, but there's even canon law within particular, like, jurisdictions, like in bishop conferences, whatever. Well, part of the canon law in the United States is that once a priest is made a pastor, the bishop cannot move them without an amicable, like an agreement, for a minimum of 6 years. So the Archbishop took this all the way to Rome and said, hey, look, this guy's screwing up my, whatever. The Rota sided with the priest. And that typically, I'm told that typically happens. Usually the Rota sides with the less authoritative party. It's kind of a level of check and balance in a way, I think. That's what I've explained to me. I've never had experience with the Rota, so I have no idea, but that's what I've been told. But yeah, so that's why Archbishop Carlson would make a guy for the first pastorship a parochial administrator, because that way they can move them out of there right away if necessary. I think that was a wise move on his part. So, yeah.
I can just imagine though where that priest stood in the hierarchy of.
You see that there is a double-edged sword, because you would imagine your next assignment would be that.
You won the battle, but you're not going to win the war.
Yeah.
Because you are now being banished to the outskirts of Timbuktu.
And you could say, well, he's not going to be the bishop forever. That's true. But the bishops have collegiality too. And the outgoing bishop could talk to the incoming bishop like, watch that guy. There's a reason he's at that position.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yeah. It's never a good idea to tick off the big guy. Right.
This is true.
And part of that also is obedience. I mean, when you're a priest, you pledge obedience, and that should take precedent over even what canon law says. Right? So if the bishop wants to move me, okay.
It's probably reason.
Probably reason, right? Yeah.
So speaking of canon, I was on retreat a couple of weeks ago, and one of the priests that came out was Canon Fred Smith.
Yeah, canons,
So
yes.
tell me about canon.
So a canon, in the history of the church, a canon was actually a member of the clergy.
Because I never heard that until that
Yeah. He was usually a member of clergy in a particular church, and that typically was reserved for someone in the cathedral. So you would basically, it used to be the point where someone was actually a priest that was designated for a particular cathedral, they would not move from there. The old law called it an IRR, irremovable rector. But that was actually designated for a lot of clergy, especially like maybe usually spots in the cathedral, like one of the more prominent churches, was reserved for like really special priests, right? And you wouldn't necessarily move them out of there because you don't want to really tick them off either, because they got some good things going on, right? And they would be called canons, right? Because canonically they would be assigned there, and they couldn't necessarily move by a particular bishop. Right?
I think I saw him come into the facility, and I think he was a pretty young guy.
Oh, sure. Well, he's probably from the Institute. What I mean by that is Francis de Sales is a particular church, particular parish. Now, it doesn't have jurisdiction. There's not like a border for it, right?
Right.
But that's been handed over to the Institute of Christ the King. And they're in order, and their cares of that order is to celebrate the extraordinary form of the Mass. Now, because they're stationed and they're only stated in that particular church, their clergy are called canons.
Okay.
Because their stability is right there, they stay there, right? And so that's the proper term for use for them.
Before we meet again, I will contact the guy that contacted the canon to find out where he's assigned. I guess I could Google him and find out where he is.
I would
And
imagine.
I don't.
The only place in St. Louis I know we have canon is the Institute.
Yeah.
So he must have been from the
Yeah.
Institute, which is fine. I mean, good. Yeah.
I just never heard that before.
Yeah.
It's, you know,
Yeah.
I've been around a long time. And
Yeah.
That just, again, that's why we come here.
Yeah. As a matter of fact,
To learn stuff.
the pastor Canon Cogshill.
Bingo.
Yeah.
That's him.
He's the
Because it's a different last name.
yeah. He's the institute priest. So he's a canon.
Is he a young guy? Younger
Yeah,
guy?
yeah. Close to my age, if not a little bit younger or older. I don't know.
What, 26, 7? No.
Oh, you know, he's probably at least his 40s, I would think. But yeah, he's our deanery. He comes to the deanery meetings. He's a good man.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a good guy. We see him a lot. Yeah, but yeah, he's a Institute of Christ the King.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's what it was.
they celebrate the extraordinary form. That's their charism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
So you know a guy who knows a guy. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Was he there hearing confessions, or was he just?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the guy that got him was Dan Sinclair of Sinclair Ford.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
He got all the priests. I mean, he got 7 priests. Well, as you know, within 2 days.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So
Was this for the Seven Holy Founders?
yeah. That's why I asked you, and then I said,
I got kicked out.
yeah, I know you did.
Yeah.
We kicked you out.
I know. It's
Just
like,
'cause-
oh, all right.
Well, and then we had a priest on retreat, so we had an extra one.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, whatever.
Yeah, Father Thomas S.S. something. I mean, long one.
Okay.
I think from Nigeria or from somewhere over there. He's here to get his master's degree. He's going to school at Slough.
Oh, okay. All right. I just want to be reimbursed my gas money. That's be nice. That's all I really want to be done.
They give a nice little stipend.
Well, that's the thing, because I drove all the way out there, and I'm like, oh, and I got there like, oh, you're extra. I'm like, oh, okay.
Didn't I tell you that we didn't? I know I told you we didn't need you. My bad.
I was cursing you the entire time.
I need to go to confession.
I'm sure I was like, yeah, okay. I was like, oh, you get that off. That's fine with me. It works out. I was actually, to tell you the truth, I think I was already exhausted that day anyway. There was a lot of stuff going on, so it worked actually pretty well for me. So it couldn't have worse.
I apologize.
No, you're fine. It's fine, Paul. It's good. I'm always happy to help whenever I can.
And we had 15 retreats, which was huge.
Good.
Huge.
Yeah.
Good. Awesome.
Yeah.
Very good.
So I have a question on vestments.
Go for it.
What color vestments are worn on Gaudete Sunday, and are they mandatory or are they optional?
Boy. Okay, Gaudete Sunday as well as Laetare Sunday, right? So Gaudete is the 3rd Sunday in Advent.
Right.
Laetare is the 4th Sunday in Lent. These are halfway points through these particular seasons. They're a combination of, so we use a combination of purple, which is usually the color we wear in those times, and white, or red and white, depending, which would make either a rose or a pink color, depending on who you are. In the Ordo of the Mass, so like the booklet that tells what Mass is happening and what day, right? It has, that usually determines like what color you would wear. It has like a little abbreviation there for a different color. On those days it does say rose, but it also has next to it in parentheses or in italics VI. VI stands for violet, right? Purple. So what that would mean is rose would be preferred, or pink. I say rose, but if you don't have those vestments, which I don't have personally rose vestments, because why would I spend all that money if we're going to wear it twice a year, right? And typically the parishes have them anyway, but some parishes may not, and so because of that, you are allowed to wear violet instead on those days.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because we went to Mass, not here, at a different parish, and the priest wore violet, and he said, I know I'm supposed to wear the pink, but I can't wear a pink vestment.
Yeah, and that. So in reality,
So everybody chuckled. And then
in reality, I mean, there is a level. It's allowed to wear purple. is that a good? I don't know. Yeah.
Was
I'll
he
tell you the
joking?
truth.
Huh?
Was he joking, or he just?
Well, no, it was, I mean, he
Tongue in
just-
cheek. Or,
He just said it matter of
Yeah.
factly. You know,
yeah, I mean,
and
and so,
he wasn't the pastor. He was a priest in residence.
Yeah.
You know.
And to tell you the truth, I was really discerning it on that day too, because I think what mass I have on that, I had masses where the deacon wasn't going to be there, and so I was like, because I like, to tell you the truth, I like my purple vestment. I do like my purple vestment. It's a gift for my family. I think it's very beautiful, and I was really discerning like, should I wear it? But I decided no, because it's more proper to wear rose on that day.
So who provides the vestments? The parish or the priest?
Both
Or a
and.
combination?
Both and. So like I have my own set of vestments that
Okay.
were given to me as gifts when I was ordained.
Makes sense.
And I typically wear those on Sundays and Sundays because I think that's proper, right? Now, if I have the deacon with me though, I don't necessarily have a set of vestments that match mine.
Right.
Now the parish usually does though.
Correct.
And so I would typically wear the parish vestments on those masses. During the week, it can be, either or. So it really is a matter of preference at that point. But there's nothing saying I have to wear the matching vestments with the dogmatic for the
Right.
weekend on that Sunday either.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't. So it's, yeah, so who makes them? Well, usually there's a group of sisters that make a lot for the guys here in Brower, Missouri, Gower, Missouri. They're Benedictine sisters. Wonderful job. But there are some local people that were trained by the sisters to actually make them here locally.
So you wouldn't typically go to Catholic Supply and order a vestment?
You could. They have them there. But see, the vestments really are a matter of taste.
Yeah.
And so, there's some good stuff at Class 1, don't get me wrong.
Oh, sure.
But, I mean, there's something to be said to, like, go to a seamstress or a seamster and say, here's what I like, here's what I want, here's the fabric I want to use, can you make this? And they do,
Yeah.
right? So, now, of course, doing that, it may be more expensive, it may be cheaper, depending on what you're trying to do. I don't know. But also, it's more durable sometimes and it's really worth it. Like, I personally, I am very appreciative of the investments that were made for me, and she did a wonderful job. And my family paid for it, and they went, so as a tribute to them, I wear those vestments as much as possible. But, I mean, there's nothing wrong with, there's always also discernment too, like sometimes, like in my home parish, I know for sure that there were certain vestments that were given to as gifts by families in like memory of certain people or whatever.
To the parish.
To the parish. And the priest would wear those vestments. Now, you could say whether they were nice or not. I don't know. There's a matter of opinion. I probably wouldn't prefer to wear them. But also, there's recognition that this is really for them.
Right.
It's for the people that, and for them, I would do that.
Yep.
And same, anywhere you go, you want to make that discernment.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So speaking of vestments, I have another question. What are the authorized / approved colors of vestments?
Yeah. Okay, so we have the usual four, right? We have green for ordinary time, white for any special occasions, red when you're talking about martyrs or especially during Triduum, purple for Advent and Lent. Then you would have the 2 days out of the year would have the rose, so those are 5. On Christmas and Easter, though, you are allowed to wear gold or silver. So those are it.
Those are it.
That's it. Those 7. Yeah. Now, sometimes you'll see what they call a Mary investment that maybe will have some blue in it, but that can't be the primary color. So white would be the primary color,
Right.
and
There's something of Mary.
Yeah, there's like a blue porphyry or something. I mean, okay.
And I've seen the Divine Mercy
exactly.
some.
Right. Oh yeah, the different like images or porphyries. That's perfectly fine. The primary color though of the vestment needs to be those 7. Right. Yeah, I know, because I've seen some other. I know what you're thinking, because I've seen some vestments that are.
Well, we went to Mass and it was black.
Okay, to that point.
And I had, again, I've been going to church a long time. I had never seen a black
So
vestment.
black can be used, so you're right, it should be 8. So black can be worn for funerals,
It wasn't a funeral.
and they can be worn on the Feast of All Souls. That is allowed. But in the same way, but also for like funerals too, white and purple can also be worn as well. I've also gone back and forth that too, like trying to get a black vestment made. It's very rare to have someone with a black vestment. In the extraordinary form of the Mass, that was done for Requiem Masses, wear black. Or for funerals, right? They would wear black. That was prescribed in the old form. In the Novus Ordo, they allowed more of an option. And I guess part of that is because, well, black, it reminds you of death. And it's like, well, yeah, white is more resurrection, and purple is more penitential. So there's the recognition that while we're in purple, we're praying for this person, right, for their entry into heaven. White is also a reminder of their baptism of the person, right? Black, there's a level of, associated with black that's sort of not so cheery.
Morbidity.
Which is the same reason why a priest wears black, right? You're reminded of your mortality. I personally am okay I'd love to have a black vestment. I'm still kind of concerned if I should go get one or not. But those are also pricey. And so you have to also take into consideration too. But yeah, black can be worn too, that's right. So it's 8. Yeah.
I used to sing for those Requiem Masses in Latin.
Beautiful,
I
right?
didn't know what I was saying, but they were beautiful.
Yeah, I know. That's kind of debate too when it comes down, practically speaking, when it comes down to Novus Ordo or extraordinary form. I think there are advantages and disadvantages of both. I think one of the great advantages of the extraordinary form is there's a level of reverence involved with it.
Very much.
That's very, very beautiful and very moving. I think with the Novus Ordo, there's a level of familiarity, which isn't bad either. I think that's good about it too. But I think you tend to lose some of the reverence with the Novus Ordo, but then you also lose some of the familiarity with the extraordinary form. So I think there is kind of a disadvantage, disadvantage of both. But again, I think it comes down to a matter of preference. And I don't know the rationale with Holy Father's actions and these things, but I don't know. I think practically speaking, though, what we've seen from Archbishop Rozansky is, I think he's going to keep everything the way it is. Meaning, if you can still go down to the Oratory of St. Luke's or Augustine and James. You can still go down to the Institute at Ramsden Sales. I think there's been a few other people that have kind of included the extraordinary form in their, and I think you can still do that now. Now with this new dubia that came out, maybe you only see it maybe 2 or 3 places now, because they don't want to mix it up with the rest of the. There was very interesting wording. They said when it goes if it's a member of the regular parish life, and I think it means if it's exclusively done with the extraordinary form, it's okay, but if it's like a mix, they prefer not. The wording was so, I think, even less clear. And so maybe more clarity may come out from that. I don't know. But I think practically speaking, you'll find you can still go to this place to still see and witness those masses. So yeah. Good. Well, one person online. If there are any questions online, we haven't had any. I'm going to turn Zoom off because no one's really on Zoom. So. Unless there's any questions here. It's 8:15 now, so maybe for almost 2 hours.
Yep. I'm full up.
I learned a great deal tonight.
Well, good. Praise God. This was all about. All right. Well, Merry Christmas, everybody, and we hope to see everyone in the new year. We will have another Bother the Father the 28th, which is the Tuesday after Christmas. So hope to see you. More welcome back to that, and watch online if you like. Otherwise, Merry Christmas. We'll see you in the new year.
Okay, it's going to be online because I head to Florida in January.